Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the 7th session of Art Saturday. Today we are on session 3 of the literature focus, and this is our very last literary session for 2021. Last week, I'm very sad that I missed the session last week. Last week, we had a focus on Solomon Plaatje, also known as Plaatje. And we invited guests, Mgqwetho and Professor Majela to join us. And they were joined by poet Vusi, who also was a speaker and discussant for the session. For those that don't know, Art Saturday is designed to support the development of art educators, learners, and students between the ages of 15 and 25, as well as the community arts facilitators. So before we begin with today's session, I would like to remind you that you are welcome at any point to use the chat item at the bottom of the screen to write questions or comments in the session that you might have. Also, please keep a book and a pen handy because we have a long list of speakers today. And what we will do is that we will open up the Q&A session right at the end of their presentation. You should be muted around about now. And so when the time comes for you to ask a question or to comment, please just unmute yourself. With all that said, I would like to introduce you to our speakers. And then I will hand the days running to Mongane Kona, who will be our chair for this week's session. Perhaps I should start by introducing Bongani. Bongani is a writer and contributing editor of Chimuranga. His writing has appeared in Safe House, Explorations in Creative Nonfiction, Redemption Song, and Other Stories, BBC Radio 4, in a variety of other publications and anthologies. He was shortlisted in 2016 for the Keynes Prize, and he is the co-editor of Migrants, which was published in 2017, an anthology of short stories. Bongani currently is a member of the curatorial team at the Archive of Forgetfulness Project. I will cut most of this bio short, so I'm very sorry if for our speakers I have left, or I will leave some of the most important works that we've done. We have a long list of speakers today. I would also like to welcome our guest speaker or speakers, starting with Poet Laureate Dr. Mongane Serote. Wally, as is well known, is a poet, novelist, and political activist. He was a member of the Black Consciousness Movement, the African National Congress, as well as commander in Mchunu. He published his first anthology of poems called Canon in 1973, which won the Ingrid Jonker Poetry Prize. He was exiled in Botswana, where he continued his resistance against apartheid, largely through the work he did by joining Medu Art Ensemble. Medu formed in Botswana in 1977 by South African exiles, included among others known exile artists such as Tamil Mnyele. They saw the aesthetic and cultural approach as rooted in the strands of South African resistance and sought to uphold, affirm African culture. Wally was inaugurated on November 6, 2018, as the 3rd Poet Laureate of South Africa. Thank you, Wally, for joining us. Up next, we have Vusi Benedict Mchunu. Vusi spent time with the Soweto Student Representative Council between 1976 and 1977. He co-founded AWA Pinaba, a writers group and journal. After Mandela's release, he returned to Johannesburg after 11 years in exile and curated Amandebele, People of Color from South Africa, which was a multimedia interactive state of the art exhibition on the arts and culture of Amandebele. It was exhibited as part of the House of Culture. Has worked very closely with African National Congress, Heritage Museum, Instinct Statues and Educational Program. He writes under his clan name, Mchunu. Welcome, Vusi. Third up, we have Zukiswa Pakama, who's trained as a camera person, script writer, and a narrator. The radio and author of children's books that she writes in her mother tongue. Among them are the youth novels, which include Idabu, Likastembele, Ubuhlobo, Bukazazi, Molili, and Uyindoda Kwedini, just to name a few. Zuki is currently freelance. Then last but not least, we have Professor Sikepe Daniel Majila. He's involved in research organizations and associations nationally and internationally, has represented scientific papers and published articles on language, culture, and literature in various journals. In 2014, Lava of His People, compiled, translated, and edited by Professor Majila and Professor Karen Hare of Prince Pierre University in Illinois, won the English Academy of Southern Africa Salt Lake Prize for translation. He's professor in the Department of African Languages and head of the Center of Pan-African Languages and Cultural Development in the University of South Africa. We have one other speaker, Mr. Uhuru Palafala, who could not make it today due to an emergency. Dr. Uhuru did represent that Kgositsile in our previous session. And if you would like to get hold of that recording, you can go on to the YouTube page of Arts and Ubuntu Trust. But also if you are, I wonder if people can hear me because I'm getting messages that some people cannot hear me. Can someone raise a hand if they can hear me? Bongani, can you hear me? Okay. All right. So if you would like to access some of the previous sessions, you could go into the Arts and Ubuntu Trust YouTube channel, or if you need them for educational purposes, please get in touch by writing to inquiries at artubuntu.org, and we can make some of the material accessible to you. Round about now, I would like to head over to Mongane, but before I do that, Bridget, who is the editor of the book that we're launching today, I would like to hand it over to her so she could talk for a couple of minutes, a little bit about the rationale behind the book. And then after I will hand over to Bongani, or maybe immediately after Bridget speaks Bongani, you can take over. Continue today's session. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much, Sipo, and greetings to everybody. Yes, some of you have been coming the last couple of weeks while we've been doing the screenings of the films. And while we were researching for the short films, we came across incredibly rich material and fantastically erudite informants whose work and insights shared much more than we could use in the short films. And it was out of this overflow of rich material that we conceived 3 small books, one on literature, one on art, and one on music. And in this way, we thought we could provide a platform for some of this material to be shared. In the Trust, when we think about materials, books or films, we always have in mind a curious high school or early university learner, the one who wants to do some self-study and go beyond the box of what is offered at school or even university in some instances. Similarly, we think of the teacher struggling under a mountain of admin to find resources. So we're trying to reach those young people with gedagtes. That's a term we used to use to describe people with some kind of consciousness in the old days in Cape Town. People with some energy and drive to look beyond the curriculum and the constraining parameters of the knowledge working institutions. And of course, the Fallists gave this endeavor a great leap forward. So things are less dire than they were before 2015, but there's still so much to do. And we continue to hope that these constraining parameters will eventually be worked to the point where all South Africans can draw on the wisdom of, quote, Mqhayi, Kunene, Kgositsile, Plaatje, Jordan, or Bosman, or Shakespeare. Today, the writers will introduce what they have written for the book on literature. But before they do, I'd like to tell a short story about my own life and the ignorance of my society that pervaded my upbringing. I was a victim of Christian national education, which in its own way was as constraining, I think, as Bantu education. And but I want to go right back to my birth and tell a funny story. I grew up in Stadterheim, a small village in the Eastern Cape. And when I was due to be born, my father and mother drove down to East London to a hospital where I was going to be born. And I was born somewhere in the car on the way. So that journey crosses where Mqhayi operated from, somewhere near the small town of Berlin. But I had no idea that such a person as Mqhayi existed. I didn't even know there was such a name until I was in my 30s. So it became clear to me only as an adult that I was deeply miseducated, in fact, deprived of access to knowledge that was part of the lives of the people and embedded in the memories of the places that I was born into but not of. And later in life, I met an Angolan historian and asked him what his area of study was. When he said Bantu civilization, I was at first startled by the juxtaposition of the words Bantu and civilization, because so often in my memory, the juxtapositions of Bantu were with education or stands. But then Bantu civilizations began to roll quite sweetly on my tongue. And it became apparent to me as I grew older and learned more that in our context, the resources of Bantu civilization are the primary brake on the dumbing down project of our knowledge broking institutions, and that many of these resources are found quite simply in storytelling, poetry, and proverbs, and more broadly in what the Nigerian historian Toyin Falola calls the ritual archive. So, and I happened to read an article yesterday in which I discovered that Ngugi calls these languages the oxygen of our civilization. So it seems as if through reclaiming knowledge of these languages and the extraordinary wisdom that is embedded in them, because even I, not a speaker, have become aware of some of the sayings of Mqhayi and so on, can provide a guide to life. And so what we're trying to do with this book is introduce some of these amazing writers who've made the effort to go and write and record and remember and transform the languages. So yeah, that's all that I have to say. But thank you very much for being here today, and I hope that the book will reach out and produce some South Africans not as ignorant as I was when I was young. Maybe still am. Thank you. All the best and enjoy today.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Bongani, and I'll be chairing this wonderful event this afternoon. But firstly, just want to say thank you to Bridget and Zipo and to everybody else who's worked behind the scenes to make this afternoon possible. And thank you as well. It's so wonderful to see so many people out on a Saturday afternoon. So thank you to everyone who's plugged in, who's listening, and I hope you'll enjoy it as much as we will. So it's quite a long lineup of speakers, so I'm just going to go straight through it. So our first speaker today, Brav Vusi Mchunu, is recovering from a recent operation, a recent procedure, but with him is Struan Douglas, who will be speaking on behalf of Brav Vusi. And so Struan, good afternoon, Brav Vusi. I'm going to hand straight over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to read Influences and Significances of Orality and Orature on Mazisi Kunene by Vusi Mchunu. Encounters at the Central Dance Arena. Mazisi Kunene believes that through performance and celebration, we rediscover the splendor, the grandeur in ourselves. Central to all these elements of orature is performance, story, riddle, tongue twister, proverb, and dance. Anywhere from the fireside, village square, or marketplace to the shrine. Whatever the location, time, and audience, orature realizes its full potential in performance. The carnival takes place in the streets. Dance is a celebration of form over fixity, a momentary triumph over gravitational pull, a symbolic conquest of gravity. In the vein of Afro-Brazilian capoeira, it becomes an anti-oppression martial art come dance sequence. Body language and gesture are central to oral transmission. Here is a quest for networking and solidarity amongst indigenous language speakers. Orature has a dynamic, living presence in all cultures, religions, functions, births, rites of passage, founding families, deaths, funerals, and remembrances. Orature is a living tradition precisely because orality, its base, beckons the new and the experimental. Orality and orature. Orality is a central technique for orature, but is not the whole picture. Orature is a systematic recording and transmission of systems of knowledge, as opposed to lived experiences recorded in oral histories via oral means. It is the primary means of managing indigenous knowledge and has many branches: literature, art, medicine, philosophy, child-rearing practices and methodologies of social cohesion. African oral literature is not just the antithesis of a written literature, but a development of a more complex literary genre, which has utilized social and linguistic symbols that are organized to appeal to a complex and varied set of community emotions. It is necessary for the socialization of thought and the preservation and interpretation of history, aimed at reinforcing, as Kunene says, the all-powerful umthetho wobuntu, fundamental law of humanity. It carries inner meanings that become complex as one probes deeper into their hidden systems. Oral poetry and history. Iskaya Impeklela says, the praise poem and the epic, which are events and deeds of a heroic nature, are ancient forms of oral poetry. Oral poetry was meant to be recited at festivals or in the king's court or at public gatherings by a traveling poet. When African pre-colonial communities recited praise poetry, shared folk tales, sang ballads, dramatized healing processes, ritualized ancestral worship, when African society had not yet disintegrated, there was no talk about a unified sensibility. It was a natural thing. Seppo Malloy tells us, oral history, especially oral tradition, allows us to gain insight into the history of peoples and societies who have not recorded their past in writing. This includes pre-literate societies who have a rich oral history, poor and more marginalized communities who do not really have a voice in official records, and people who deliberately destroyed any written information to avoid arrest under oppressive regimes, or had such documentation seized by the police. One of the first moments in a process of healing is to speak one's truth. Cyber orality and orature. Kenyan novelist and theorist Ngugi wa Thiong'o reminds us of the advocacy by African scholars, the fighting pioneering spirit of those African histories, led principally by Bethwell Allen Ogot of Kenya and Kenneth Onwuka Dike of Nigeria, to have oral sources accepted as valid by universities and institutions of higher learning in Africa and the world. Ngugi says, the language of cyberspace borrows the language of orality. It is neither one nor the other. It is cyber orality. The problem has been their placement in a hierarchy. Network, not hierarchy, will free the richness of the aesthetic, oral, or literary. We can talk about classic and contemporary orature. Nature in orature manifests itself as a web of connections of mutual dependence, new combinations and new platforms, nature, nurture, cyberture, orality, orature, and cyborature. We're going to stop here for now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Strun. Thank you so much, Vusi. And just to say as well that the Strun was reading from the opening chapter of the book, which in a way, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, lays out the kind of theoretical framework that helps you read this incredible book. So thank you very much to Vusi. Thank you so much, Strun. Our next speaker is Prof. Machila, and he'll be drawing out the indigenous influences in Sol Plaatje's work. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Program Director Bongani Kona, and everyone who is attending this important occasion. Plaatje's works were influenced by Setswana stories, proverbs, poetry, the institution of Bukhosi, chieftaincy, Dikhomu, cattle heading, as well as cultural values of Butu, African humanism, and Buikobo, humility, just to mention a few. I'll give two examples of Setswana proverbs, only two examples. Plaatje includes in his 1916 bilingual collection, republished in 2004 and again in 2007 with illustrations, a story entitled Katlolo ya Kgosi, the King's Judgment, and he states, Batswana bana le polelo nngwe e. E tshwana le katlholo ya Solomoni e e bolelwang mo Bibeleng. Ntse baruti ba pele ba re e fitlhetse e itsege mo Batswaneng. Bibele ise e kwalwe ka Setswana. English translation. The following is a Batswana story. It is similar to the Bible story of the judgment of Solomon, but the pioneer missionaries say they found it to be known among the Batswana before the Bible was ever translated into Setswana language. In this story, two mothers claim one baby after one woman has accidentally suffocated a baby in the night and then steals the other woman's child. Kgosi, the king, asked for a sword to cut the baby in half. One of the mothers acquiesces while the other pleads with the chief to spare the child's life and give it to the other mother. Her love for the baby is stronger than the pain of losing him to the other mother. The chief discerns that she who pleaded for the baby's life must be the real mother and settles the dispute in her favor. Whereas in the Bible story, the emphasis is on the discernment and wisdom of the king, in the Batswana story, the emphasis is on the mother. It is explicitly stated that katlholo e ke yona e simolotseng seane sa Setswana se se reng mmangwana o tshwara thipa ka fa bogaleng. This judgment is the origin of a Setswana proverb. The mother of the child is the one who grasped the knife by the blade. The Setswana proverb and story extols the strength and the courage of mother's love, which prompts her to sacrifice, to endure pain, and brave danger for the sake of her child. Whereas Plaatje's story acknowledges the Bible, the missionaries, and hence one view of the story which is focused on the king's wisdom, it simultaneously honors Setswana culture and proverb, highlighting another view of the story focused on the strength, the tenacity, the resilience of Batswana motherhood. There are always two ways, at least, of viewing a story, depending on where one stands, but there is also a place of convergence. Our shared humanity, identity allows us to enter the space between cultures and languages, where we can learn about wonderful diversity of our oneness. I'm going to give you another example. This example comes from Sol Plaatje's translation of Julius Caesar. And this is how it goes from Shakespeare. Shakespeare says, according to his virtue, let us use him. With all respect and rights of burial, within my tent his bones tonight shall lie, most like a soldier ordered honorably. So call the field to rest, and let's away to part the glories of this happy day. And Sol Plaatje in his translation says, "Are mo direleng tlotlo e e lebanyeng maatlametlo a gagwe, re ye go mmoloka ka ditshwanelo tsotlhe le tirelo tsa phitlho. Marapo a gagwe gompieno a tla lala mo tenteng ya me, jaaka marapo a motlhabane yo o tlotlegang. A tlhola mephato e itapolose, gonne e le ruri la gompieno e tlhotse e se tsatsi la tla la tlhaola malata. E ne e le la marumo majamagosana." Plaatje, the translator. It's a line not in Shakespeare's original that sums up the action of the play. E tlhotse e se tsatsi la tla la tlhaola malata. E ne e le la marumo majamagosana. The implication is that many people lost their lives, including gifted and worthy and selfless Marcus Brutus. The line echoes the Setswana proverb, "Ga se tlala tlhaola malata, ke lerumo le ja magosana," which means it is not hunger the chooser of servants, but spears the slayers of princes, which might be rendered in modern English as, unlike hunger, death does not visit the poor only, it takes people indiscriminately. Plaatje's proverb both sums up the action of the play and again praises Brutus. In summary, Plaatje's transposition of Shakespeare into Setswana poetic and musical idiom, the addition of Setswana proverb, eulogizing Brutus, and the choice of language reflecting Botswana cultural norms and beliefs surrounding the death reveal the sensibilities of a man deeply rooted in his Setswana language and Botswana culture. Thank you, Bongani.
Prof. Thank you. Next up, we have Zukiswa Pakama, and she'll be speaking about the poetry of Nontsizi Mgqwetho. Over to you, Zukiswa, and if it's okay, may I please ask you to turn your camera on.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay.
Perfectly.
Okay. I'm going to be talking about Umama Nontsizi Mgqwetho. I'm shaking because there's so much to say about this remarkable woman, and it's such a shame that I didn't know about her all of my life and never heard about her name. I didn't know who she was, where she was coming. I only knew her only recently, like maybe 2017 or so, which is for me, it's such a shame, you know, because when we're talking about like listening to literature, that is, you listen as you read, and you have to feel, to hear the voices while you are reading in your literature. You hear the voices. You are taken to that place, to the moment when the writer was writing. You know, when I first lay my hands on this book, The Nation's Bounty, which was edited by Jeff Opland, from the works of Nontsizi during the 1920 to 1930 period, where she was working, she would send her poems to the Mkhetelo Wabantu newspaper. You know, I was like, oh my gosh, you know, one word that she says, that she writes in, it zooms you into the subject. You go, you follow the flow. Like the picture is built in your mind as you read. The picture becomes vivid. I don't know if I'm making sense. You become consumed in your own world, the world the writer has created for you. So from the works of Umama Nontsizi, you get that and more. You know, I've written some of the stuff here so that I don't forget. You know, all of her poems They are very unique. It's a unique style that I would love to. I'm a writer, né? I write poetry, but I would love to have that unique style. It's like she's standing right next to you. It's like you could feel her breathing above you, like saying, wake up, look, please, no, hear this. Her voice is like there to warn people, to rebuke, and she has times where she praises the nation. Like if you do good, she would write a poem about that. I've got a few poems there I'm gonna read, but there's a lot of us, ne? So she was a journalist, ne? But you could hear from her poetry that she was now reporting. So her journalism side would stand up. She writes about the earthquake in Joburg in those days and liken it, the rupturing of the earth with the brokenness of the society that she was seeing at that time. So you could see that from her. And there are three things that I want to mention about her. Very important. She was an educated woman. And at a time where the place of a woman was in the kitchen, where the place of a woman was only to give birth and raise children and do household chores, but she was out there with the men writing about izinto zobuhlanga. You know, she was in Joburg, but while she was in Joburg, living in an urban environment, but in her writing, you could see this rural girl from the Eastern Cape. You see, so she would liken everything with the rivers and everything, the lands in the Eastern Cape while she's driving the message for that moment. Right? So from her poetry, you see her, you hear her fish voice. So she was a fish woman. She was a go-getter. She wanted her voice to be heard, and she made sure that her voice was going to be heard. Okay, now this is as late as this, but I've heard her voice. Okay? The second one that I noted on her poetry was she wanted social cohesion. She loved her roots. She wanted to uplift her people, the Africans, because you would hear her calling for unity amongst all Black people. You know, the river is between Black people, like with ethnicity and languages and all of that. She was against it. She was calling people from her poetry so that they are one. They are one. Like if I can read one of her poems, it's on this lovely book, The Nation's Bounty. So you can't hear it. There's a poem here that I just want to quickly read. It's on page 100. It says unity Black workers. Umanyano basebenzi abantsundu. But I'm just going to read the English version. It let the waters of Africa sound. God and the nations speak in unison. Let the footpaths sow unity's seed from here to far off together. Then the last verse, Black nations must come together. Let the voice of the workers be heard. Unity, Black workers, I lack clay and grease to shape it. Hurry up, see eye to eye. Clear the scrub and we'll move on together. Those are the kind of poetry that you would find in her poetry. There's another one on page 178 where she's looking at what is happening in Africa and the foreigners coming in, taking over seemingly Africa. She's like, this not should be happening. This is page 178. Sorry, I don't want to say it says Siyayibinza Africa, which means you are stabbing Africa. Let me read the second verse. My people, we are stabbing Africa. Siyayibinza Africa makowethu ngokuntamana sibulala amawethu. Seside sanxiba ke nemixhaka yamawonga abulali Africa. You could feel the pain and the passion in her as she wrote about Africa. I like her choice of words because we no longer use these words. Like say mawo. Those are like those nice words that you don't normally hear from our poetry today. Then the last one is Zulu and Xhosa, Sotho, Swazi, Mfengu. You resemble each other in lacking about, but there once was a time when you were one people, united when nations were called into being. So this is the lady that we nearly missed out. We nearly missed out on all of this wealth. You know, the book says the nation's bound, which is ingebo. isizwe, at the wealth of the nation. That's where we need to dig in from. And then the third thing I want to mention about Nontsizi, she was a prophetess. For me, when I read her work, I would say, okay, man, it's like she could discern and see through the future. Her words are like a lamp to the children of Africa. Her words, the poetry is still relevant. It's still relevant to this day. Poem 184 about Africa wailing, as if she could see that what we are experiencing in our continent today in 2021. The constancy was the famines, the migration of African people throughout to Europe and all those things. She wrote about those things between that 10-year period. I'm worried that she emerged in 1920 and she disappeared. All of a sudden, after 10 years, we never hear about her. We don't know what happened to her. That pains me. It makes me wonder and want to go out and look and research and find out what happened to her, because we would have had more, you know? So I don't know if I can, no, I'm not gonna read this one because I'm running out of, I know there's a lot. But then from her, you notice that in all of her poems, in all of her poetry, as much as she's about Africanism, the joy of being a woman, like she's calling to all mothers, she calls them as mothers of prayer. You notice that she had an element of believing in God who created the heavens. She had an element of believing in Amata, the God of, you know, in our African religion, we believe in the ancestors, that they talk for us. She had that, and then she would use God because she believed that there is a supernatural being who controls us. She would say, in one of her poems, it's in page 134, where she likens, she wished that Africa could have wise leaders to lead the people. She's got this question, zifuna iinkokheli ezinjengoDaniel. Iinkokheli ezingoBuddha zilingeke, ocombulula amaqhina axakayo, zizakuqonda ukuba konakele zicebisane noThixo olisiko. If I can read the English version that has been translated by Phyllis Ntanchala, it says, look, today, I want you to understand the essence of our distress. We are a flock ready for scattering. Agree with me, men, messy ladies. Where are leaders like Daniel? Tell us, you clutch of yes men. Leaders who make no mistakes, seek them out in forest depths. Leaders free of foul habits, seek them, roll out a mat. Leaders free of rash decisions. How we recovered with chaff from the threshing floor. So that's the kind of a woman she was that I can say about her. But I would like to stop there for now. Yeah? But because there's so much, this is really the nation's bounty. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your enthusiasm and passion. Thank you. We're going to go back to Vusi and Strone for the second contribution on reflections on Mazisi Kunene. Over to you, dear.
Thank you. The second section of the talk, significance and meaning. Why does Mazisi Kunene choose the epic format? The epic incorporates networks, realms, and time and space elements within a large body of work. Generic elements of orature, riddle, proverb, story, song, poetry, drama, dance, myth nourish the imagination, explain the universe, and help humans to come to terms with it. The story is all-pervasive in orature. It has its basis in the human confrontation with time. Nobody knows what will happen in the next second, hour, day, week, month, or year. That is in the future. Founder of the New African Movement online archive, Ntongela Masilela, emphasizes the Afrofuturism attitude of Kunene. Kunene's continuities in past, present, and future. Triple streams of consciousness, flowing and exchanging confidences, knowledge, wisdom, and dreams. Kunene had to search for his own particular classicism, demanded by Xhosa poet S.E.K. Mqhayi, Kunene's master. Benedict Wallet Vilakazi, the classicism of two great Zulu poets of the 19th century, Magalwani and Mshongweni. Kunene premised the tradition, styles, poetic form, manner of rendition, and the coinage of new expressions from the early Zulu praise poets, just as C.L.S. Inyembezi recounted in the explanatory notes to his praise poems of Zulu kings. Kunene turned his back on Zulu poets, imitating the English romantic poetry of Keats and Shelley. And Mazisi Kunene said, I think it's logical, normal to write in your mother tongue because there's a psychology, a philosophy connected with the selection or even the shape of the words you use that is linked up with your experience as a person in the language, in the milieu in which you speak, in which you communicate, in which you challenge others. A language has certain nuances that are complex and secretive, and these nuances are crucial because in making a creative work, you cannot merely make a statement. My great-grandmother, Mkhandiana of the Ntuli family, a great oral historian and narrator of legends, told me, knowledge is of the ancestors. The secret of ancient wisdom lies in the names of things and their forgotten meanings. As the Zulu orature literary tradition had been devalued by British colonialism, I started writing without models, but I eventually discarded all the experiments in preference for an internal rhythm, which I found in studying traditional poetry. This is the method I have found most appropriate to Zulu poetry. And this, Kunene's internal rhythm style, gave us the masterpieces like Emperor Shaka the Great, Anthem of the Decades, The Ancestors and the Sacred Mountain, Impepu, Igudu Likesunkabeko, the latter book that Vusi translated into English as Pipe Dreams. Not only did Kunene harbor a fascination with creation myth legends from ancient Egypt, the Maya in present Mexico and Guatemala, the Berber in present Morocco and Algeria, and the Hindus of the Ganges Valley, Kunene had the special interest and unique gift to probe behind the meanings of the narratives, to decipher the secret revelations, and to seek parallels from his own training in the Nguni creation myth traditions. His bookshelves were lined with classics like the Mayan Popol Vuh, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and the Indian epic, the Ramayana, and books on the Moors in Spain. Kunene's meditations as a poet considered the slowness, the hesitancy, and calculated moves in the time register and calendar of African gods. Kunene's inspiration was the Swazi Zulu calendar, Nkosi Wenkwala, fetching water from the ocean, Womflanga, the reed ceremony for the maidens, and Mkosi Wokweshwama, the first fruit ceremony, an enabling environment for orality and orature to flourish. Vusi Mchunu remembers, in the post-1994 democratic dispensation, as heritage practitioners, we focused on introducing the free African voice, redressing the heritage narrative in South African museums, rehabilitating indigenous knowledge sources, and planting them in the mainstream. We had to revert to oral informants and viewpoints as signposts for a new route in transformation. Sitting with Baba Kunene in his KZN University office, I still vividly see the lines of skepticism on his forehead and clearly hear his robust voice exhorting us to move away from laments of a defeated people to search and rediscover our power, our conquering psyche within, the creation myths, the epics, the heroism of the divine, the warrior queens and kings, the African migration stories, ancient and current, the liberation struggles for independence, and the current struggles to end cultural poverty alienation. Kunene was a bold restorer of African humanity and dignity through the medium of African languages. Thank you.
Wow, sure, incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you. Then our last contribution, thank you so much again, Vusi and Strong. Then our last contribution before we open up to the Q&A is going to be from Zukiswa. So over to you, and she'll be reflecting on the legacy of SEK Mqhayi. Zukiswa, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay. SEK Mqhayi, wow, what can I say? Because as children, we heard of his name. And when we were growing up, we recited poems by SEK Mqhayi. But first of all, who was SEK Mqhayi? He's known by many names. You know, he's known as the father of Xhosa poetry. He's among the giants. He's like the one who molded the language. He was a grammatist. You know, he was the one who like, how can I say this? But okay, let me first say this. I fully agree when it's said that he was the father of poetry, because okay, he was born in 1875 in a converted Christian family, hence the name Samuel, because when you get to history, they would say her parents, like, he was a special child, things like those. And then his mother passed away when he was 2 years old, and he was brought out by his father, who was the church minister. So you could see where the richness of his relation in all his writings. There's a God that he mentions in it, because that's how he was brought up from being a child. And then when his mother passed away, he went to live in Kunene, where his uncle, I think his brother's father, was a headman. So he would be there listening. He would be there around the headman's court when the people were telling, like, it was where, like, there was no court mostly at that time, especially in the rural areas. I think one of his first book, Ityala Lamawele, was one of his experiences, maybe from looking at what was happening at his uncle's homestead. Okay, so that's where he learned the oral traditions, like to be told fables, to be, you know, when we sit around the fire at night under the skies and under the stars, and you listen to stories being told. And today it will be one who's telling the story, tomorrow there will be another one, like as you're sitting along the fire. So he learned there to tell stories, to write, to learn the richness of the language. That's where he learned it. Okay, what I'm supposed to talk about now is what legacy has he left us with? There's so much. There is so much. For starters, Mqhayi wanted the Xhosa people to be able to read. He wanted them to read, to be able to read, to understand what's written, what's in the book, and not be told and rely on being told, this is what you should do. He wanted them, he advocated reading. And then from then, he would take the books that were written in English that his people could not understand and translate them to isiXhosa, so that everyone could understand what is there and be able to do. That's why he was one of the people who translated the Bible alongside with Soga and the others, the Jabavos, you know, all those prominent language people. So he was part of the translation of the Bible, not to say that people should follow the Bible, but they should understand what is in the Bible and choose it for themselves. So he was an advocate for us, for literature, I would say that. You know, as this week we were celebrating the 8th of September, which is International Literacy Day, and we were out at the schools. I was so sad when I saw that children can still at this time not read properly. That was Mqhayi's advocate. He was busy, like, trying to make sure that my people can read. They can read with understanding and understand what is written. Okay, So he loved the language. He wanted us to be proud as Africans, to be proud of our own languages and write with those languages. But in those days, it was hard. So while he was a teacher at Lovedale, but history says, because he could not agree mostly of the way the African history was told by, or was taught to the children by missionaries and stuff like that. So there were some discrepancies that he was not happy with. So he moved out from teaching and became a writer and an editor for the Izwila Band. That's where all of her poems, you find them there. That was that's when he was writing there. That's when he got the title. He used to address himself as Imbongi Akwa Gombo, Gombo being East London. Ne? So he used to address himself as that. And what I don't understand is why they would write with pseudonyms so that they are not known who wrote this. So they were not really free to write about their feelings in those times. So they would use pseudonyms, because now he would write as Imbongi Akwa Gombo, but then his name was changed by Alan Soga and others, and he was known as Imbongi Yesizwe Jikelele, which is the national poet. That was when he was writing for the Izwila Band. All her poems were there. And then the next thing that we got from him is he also wrote for Umthetheli Wabantu during the time when Mama Nontsizi was writing there, because the paper was formed in 1920, I think by the Soga, by Alan Soga, yeah. So he wrote during that time, but he didn't stop, he didn't vanish like Mama Nontsizi did by 1929. So also in that paper, he was writing under the pseudonym Zululwazi, which is a well of knowledge. My question is why? Why you wouldn't write any piece and just say Mqhayi? Why? What was not, why they were not allowed? You see, so he stands out as an exemplary poet of the new African movement to younger intellectuals. Like, he is mentioned along writers such as Nontsizi Mgqwetho, Benedict, Wally, A.C. Jordan, Walter B. Nhlapo, and others. That's the caliber of writers they were in those days. They were pushing for the languages, for the African languages, to have a stand. But it took so many, like a long time, because we only had to have our language recognized after 1994, which means the work that they were busy doing there was slowly, you know. Okay, number 4, his books were of note. They are models. Mqhayi's books are models of the Xhosa language. They were used by outstanding writers, you know. Before they write, they would use Mqhayi's books. So that's the legacy that he left us with. He is mentioned by W.B. Kgositsile in his book Zemkinkolo Inkomo Magwalandini, published in 1906. And also, he's also an autobiographer. He wrote about himself. He referred to himself as Mqhayi Wasentabozuko. So his work was translated by scholar U.W. Jubeni. We still look up to his work. And one of his prominent books, one of the first books in his Xhosa language, which was published in 1914, was translated to English 52 years later, in London by Lewis Goss. And also, you find this book has been adapted to stage plays, to films. I remember watching it on the TV when I was still in my teenage years. This one, you know, he wrote poetry for school children. You see, this was an Imbongi who would go into the courts of King Rika and all those things and just abonge J, ade Imbongi, ebonga inkosi. But he would, from being this respected and honorable Imbongi of the chief, he would go down and write for children. You know, there's this song by Miriam Makeba, that's one of his poems that, like, they are very short. You would hear children playing, like reciting this. That's the kind of a person he was. So lastly, what I want to say is that we learned from him how to. I'm a poet as well, but I'm still struggling. I want to learn more from him, even though, because I use most of his books. I use when he wrote the poem, the sad poem about the singing of the Mendi in 1917. I think he was about 42 years old then, because he was born in 1875 and the ship sank in 1917. He wrote the poem as if he was there. You could feel his voice. That's where I get the listening to literature. You could hear his voice. You know, he's like telling the men that you were supposed to go there and die, but it is our pride to us as the Xhosa people that we had a hand in helping, you know. So as much as that was a sad event, Mqhayi uses his poetry, his choice of words, to bring hope to the nation that not all was lost when the ship sank. So I'm just gonna end it there, because there's so much to say about Mqhayi. I don't know where to start or where to begin, but there's so much to say. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you again, Zukiswa. And yeah, thank you to all the incredible panelists. And wow, it's been an amazing afternoon. And just to say, everyone, some housekeeping. We've got about 20 minutes for Q&As. And if you'd like to ask a question or even just share some comments or reflections, you can raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you to unmute yourself. And then finally, we'll hand over, after those 20 minutes, we'll hand over to Poet Laureate, the elder Mongane Wally Serote, who will have the last word. He'll share reflections, have the last word, and then that will be the end of the afternoon. So yeah, if you've got a question or a comment, please just raise your virtual hand and then I'll call on you to unmute yourself. But maybe to kickstart us off, and I want to bring Prof. Majila into the conversation. And thank you again to all the incredible panelists. And Prof, I think my question for you was going to be, as somebody who's in the academy, what does the presence or absence of these writers' voices that we've been talking about this afternoon, their absence, what do we lose by their absence in the curriculum? And then maybe a second question added to that, are you able just to cast your eye on contemporary South African writing in indigenous languages and maybe just share some reflections for us? I hope that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bongani. I'll start with the first question. At the moment, we really trying hard and we have succeeded to bring them back, to bring all these books by writing books such as Bringing Plaatje Home, and by also writing books like Lover of His People, and so many institutions started asking us as to whether, like maybe from the point of view of Plaatje, as to whether do we still have Plaatje's translations. And then we actually did work with Vets Press, and then we did get some books that were reprinted. At the moment, some of Plaatje's works, especially the translation of Julius Caesar, Dintsutsu Tabo Julius Caesar, and the Poso Comedy of Errors. They are prescribed, and then we are using them at this point in time. And then one other thing, like when you look especially at the present authors at this point in time, I don't know, it looks like something actually went wrong. I don't know when and how, because when Zukiswa talks about the quality of literature written by people like Mqhayi, and when we also, I was also listening when presentation was actually done by people like Daniel Kunene and so on and so on. People like both Daniel Kunene, when I was actually reading his works, he says, because he also wrote in English and I think, was it French? Some of the works were translated into other European languages. But he said, first and foremost, when he sat down to write something, he started in Zulu. And then he would actually translate or make adaptations. So now, I don't know, at that point in time, These people were dedicated to what they were doing at the point in time. And then it was not actually a market for people just to make money. This was actually people expressing love for their culture, for their languages, and for their own history. And we've got so many in Setswana, we've got so many in isiZulu, we've got so many in Tshivenda. I was also, because I studied different African languages as well, I also read poems of Shigwabu Limu, who is Venda, powerful poems from his anthology. So maybe at this point in time, maybe the platform that we have at this point in time, we need to go out there to encourage our youngsters, because there are so many things at the moment happening, so that they can actually begin to look at those and write about them. And then especially the language, I mean, a good language, if they use good imagery, like when I was also looking at the works of Kearopetse, Kgositsile, he worked so hard because he also grew up in a Setswana environment. He was raised by his grandmother and his mother. And the most important thing, when he was in the US, he started using especially the background and the theme of Setswana indigenous poems, and to write poetry of other political figures, but using, he didn't actually want to, he wanted the Setswana or the African indigenous poems. He wanted us to continue with that route because they are so rich. And if you look at them, the African poems, vis-a-vis maybe the European and the European poems, if you look at our own poems, they have not just been written for entertainment, but they also contain history, they contain our philosophy, they contain the way we think, they contain our economic practices, they've got everything in one. Yeah, thank you, Bongani.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much, Prof. And if it's okay, I'm going to swing over to you, Strone and Vusi. I think one of the things that struck me when I was reading the book is that Ngugi wa Thiong'o is almost like a presiding spirit over this book, particularly in your work, Vusi, because you mentioned the scholarship on actual academic activism of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and I wondered if you could just share some reflections on the profound influence of his work, if it's okay, to the subject that we're talking about today. You're on mute.
Bongani, I said if you can give Vusi a couple of moments to respond.
Okay.
I'll speak it up. Maybe go on to the next question. Give a couple of minutes.
Thank you, dear friends. So then I'll go over to Zukiswa. Hi, Zukiswa. I think in one of your essays, I'll ask the first question that I've got for you. In one of your two contributions to the book, you say that indigenous languages seem to be dying a rather sad, slow, and painful death at the very hands of their custodians. And I just wanted to know maybe if I could ask you to expand on that.
Okay. Yeah, we are trying, but it is hard. You know, the time we live in today are different, because you find us that we're trying to merge as the people of South Africa. Right? So our children need to understand all the languages. You find that most of our children, they learn at school in English, or we send them to English medium, like schools that do not use the African languages. For some reason, sometimes it's not by choice, it's the situation the economical situation, like you're working in an environment and you take your children to live there in a place where the Xhosa language or the Tswana language or whatever language is not spoken like as you would if you were living in the rural areas. We no longer live in the rural areas. We're out there, we are working, we're trying to get something for our children, you know? So that, as much as it is good, it kind of, in a way, makes our languages diminish a little bit. I've published Xhosa books, and I struggle to find people to read them because they do not understand them because of the system that we are under. We have been growing. So when 1994 came, we were like, okay, now we are free. We can do anything that we want to better our lives in that sense. But then as we were doing that, we were slowly grasping, the grasp of our language was like slipping off our fingers. So, but we are doing as many, like as much as we could. Like when I was at the school on the 8th, I saw the enthusiasm on the learners when they were reading books in isiXhosa. And they were showing this eagerness that I don't understand this word. What does it mean? You know, as much as we are losing our language, I'm not gonna lie and say our languages are not slipping off a little bit. It means we still need to do more and encourage. Like if you are at home, we learn at home from home. I learned my Xhosa language at home before I was sent to school. I could use the language from the idioms, the Xhosa idioms from my grandmother, from my mother, from the stories that they would tell us in Xhosa. So when a child goes out to school and learn English, she comes back home and learn in the mother tongue that is spoken at because when you lose your language, you lose your culture, you lose your identity, you lose who you are. So it is very important for parents today to how can I say, to embrace the language in their homes, so that when children go outside, they have the roots in them and they don't lose it. Because they say if you teach a child from age 1 to 7, anything you teach that child, it's installed in that child. So I think now it lies more on us as parents to educate, to see, for our children to see value in our Africanism, in our languages, you know, so that we can build, like slowly try to get up. If Mqhayi would wake up today and see what's happening, if Nontsizi would wake up today, I don't know really. I don't know if I'm trying to answer you.
No, thank you. I've actually got one follow-up, and please forgive me, Vusi and Strone. I just have one follow-up for Zukiswa. You know, one of the things that I really love about your two essays in the book is that you're talking about the education of these writers, how they became Mam Nontsizi and SK Mqhayi. They're becoming as what today we would call artists, rather. And I just wanted to know, because you speak so passionately about your reading and writing poetry, tell us a bit about your own education as a poet, like the challenges that you've encountered, how you've grown, and if it's okay, it's just, yeah, if you could just share.
No. For me, it's a joy. It's been a journey. Like for me, just like Mqhayi, my grandmother was a storyteller. My father was a story. You would do something good and they would say, I will tell you a story later. So you would be like passionate to do whatever you were asked to do. Because I love stories. So they would say, it was not about paying you money for doing this. They would say, I will tell you a story. So that's how I grew up. So that's what I think we should do at home. So for me, as a writer, it took it was a long journey. But because I like what I think it's Professor Machila who said, the people, they were writing not because of money, but because of the love they have about the language. So for me, writing as a poet, I do it because I like it, even if I'm not gonna get paid, okay? Because it's in me. I just cannot be quiet. I write about everything that I see. I write when we cry and I write when I'm happy. So when I started writing, I started by when my grandmother would tell me a story. Later, when we were playing, you know, that we call it copy haste or whatever. So I would play with the children, my siblings, and I would tell them that story and I would add more. And then my grandmother would say, no, I didn't say that, because I was just adding on and on to what she told me. So that's when I'm very enthusiastic about Mqhayi and Nontsizi because Nontsizi has got this beautiful voice. I don't know why we didn't know about her. So for me, it's been a journey, but a long journey with obstacles because I've been writing for radio and all of that, like drama and stuff like that. So for me, and I'm still doing it. And the challenges are there. They are not going to go away. But the passion is in me. It's not going to go away. So.
Thank you very much, Zukiswa. Vusi and Strone, could we come over to you, dear?
Yes, thank you, Bongani. Vusi just wanted to emphasize, further to the essay, how well connected these they were. So he wrote Ngugi, Kunene, Masalele, they were all in California. They all collaborated in the rediscovery of the new African movement. Masalele and Ngugi taught in the same sister colleges. Ngugi has taken orality and orature into the internet age, emphasizing the networking and connections in time and space. Further to that, Kunene was taught both by Zulu and Swazi traditions. He reintroduced to our consciousness Morena Moslomi, the Sotho philosopher, but the scope was for the whole world. They were friends.
Sure, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I just want to ask again that if we have about 9 minutes left for any questions from the floor. And yeah, Prof. Majila, may I please ask you to respond to the question by Bridget that's in the chat, if you can see it, that's okay. And if anybody else has any other questions, you can just raise your hand or just pop them into the chat. Thank you. And thanks again, Vusi and Strone.
Bongani, are you able to read that question? I can't see it clearly. Can you read it for me, the question? Unmute.
Yo. Saying of the year, am I on mute? So the question goes,
also,
thank you.
Mr. Machila, if you can turn on your camera.
All right, okay.
Okay, so the question goes, what role could television and radio play in making all the languages of SA familiar to all South Africans by using subtitles to all South Africans? Isn't it a pity that the channels are divided along language lines, creating further divisions instead of everything being available in all languages?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I really think it is important. But before maybe I respond to it, let me start by saying that because I'm at the University of South Africa, we were working hard with UNISA Press to publish literature in all the 9 official African languages. And then we worked so hard, Bongani. I actually did get other people to join me on board. And then we were on all 9 South African languages radio stations. And then we were actually requesting, especially people who are able to write, and especially experienced people, like people who have worked before or who were teachers, who are at home now, to send us their stories. And the main important thing that we wanted to do was actually for them to create something that can be shared with our children at schools. Because at the time when I started this project, I was also worried that the kind of material that we get, truly speaking, is not as good as the books that we read when we were growing up, and maybe something like 15, 20 years ago, we still had quality of books. So what we did, we actually did get, the radios actually did give us a chance to market these products. And then we wrote 24 books. We actually published 24 books. And then in different languages, even in isiNdebele. You know that the isiNdebele is actually the latecomer as far as all these are concerned, but we even published, I think it was 3 novels in isiNdebele. So we have books in isiNdebele, isiXhosa, isiZulu, Chivenda, Chitsonga, Setswana, Sesotho, all of those. And then we actually did get good reviewers who reviewed the books, and then the books were published. Now, when actually time comes for the Department of Education to advertise, you know that from time to time, after a period of 4 or 5 years, they will invite people to submit the books that they have written. And then we did actually submit as UNISA Press. And then not only that, even though we actually had good reviewers, we send them to the reviewers of the Department of Education, and the Department of Education accepted them, but you won't believe me. When the book were about to prescribe, and I'm one of those authors, because I also wrote Budiben Jamathomola, and then I didn't want to encourage people to write whilst I was not writing, whilst I was not doing it myself. So we did this together. Now, when we submitted, after they were actually reviewed and they were happy about the content and everything, at a later stage, they used the so-called B, they call it UNISA, because of all its rules and the whatever didn't qualify for BEE and whatever. So all the books were dropped. And the only ones that were taken were actually, they didn't qualify to be, but the only problem at that point in time, they said that the BEE certificate of the university was not good enough. So now you can imagine all the efforts that people took, and then all the efforts that we also did, everybody who actually reviewed the corrections that were sent, and then when the books were ready to be submitted, and then the only thing, because the children actually needed this kind of books. But what I can also say is that we also have got older books, like we were talking about in Sepedi. We've got OK Matsipe, who also wrote classics. And then we've got other in Northern Soto, Southern Soto, in isiZulu, isiXhosa, isiNdebele. And then we also have people who wrote. We were actually thinking that they can actually be brought back. I mean, if we are still reading Shakespeare, who wrote about 500 years ago, I'm thinking that we can still read Mqhayi, we can still read all our, because information and knowledge, especially if they are good stories and good books, there is no way in which we can cut them down and say these are old books, for as long as they are relevant and for as long as people can learn from the books that we have published. So now, radio especially participated, and they gave us the platform. It's only that at the end of it all, when people have worked so hard, I'm thinking that the books must be taken to where they belong, to the schools where children can read them. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Prof. Abdul, I think you had a question. Please, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. You're still muted.
Sorry, but I want to acknowledge there is a gentleman among the group, which is Professor Njabulo in the Bele, who's also a writer. I want to acknowledge him first and foremost. And secondly, I want to ask him to give a comment on view about a nation can be different groups. It's like building a house, and you cannot build a house only on pillars. You must have a transversal who connects those pillars. if we talk about the languages, everyone has to know the language of the country that he comes from. So in order to say, and to be proud to say, I am from that country. But if we start classifying and dividing as pillars, when we are building that house called country, that's my own personal question open to everyone. But I would like also Professor Njabuleng Ndebele to talk about and to give his comment and his point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdul. Yeah, welcome, Prof. Ndebele. It's entirely up to you, but you're welcome to unmute yourself if you'd like to answer.
Thank you, Bongani, and to everyone. I missed a lot of the conversations because it being a Saturday, I had to catch up with things, and came in the middle of the conversations, and I was kind of taken by surprise by the question, as I was not expecting to say anything. But let me say that in response to the question, what got me interested in this conversation this afternoon was the title of it, which was brought to my attention by my assistant following an email that she received, I think yesterday or Thursday. It's listening to literature towards a South African canon. The idea of a South African canon or an African canon has been a preoccupation of mine for a long time. And to be very brief about a long and complex subject. In the 1970s, when I started an interaction with African literature, it was at what was known at the time as the University of Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland. And there, there was an entire curriculum in the English department. Probably 60% of it was of African writers. That is where I came into contact with Chinua Achebe, with Ngugwa Thiong'o, who was called James at the time, and the Gabriel Okara, and Aikwe Ama, and a lot of other writers Kamara Lay and or Sambane Usman, whose writings were in French but were translated into. What this tells me is that because someone made reference to the debates by Ngugi, what was happening to me at the time, I experienced as a coherent relationship between the political process of decolonization that was sweeping across the continent on the one hand, and on the other, that the restoration of the African voice through the literature that was written at the time. I recommend Transition magazine, if you could find it in our libraries, to go through the strong and robust debates that were going on at the time. So there was this very close relationship, therefore, between the transformation of the continent into a political space on the one hand, and on the other, the articulation of that transformation through the voices of Africa's writers and poets. So one can speak, therefore, of a canon that was developing at the time, and then if you ask ourselves, what is the situation today? I think the situation today is a sad one for South Africa. For example, I think even the continent, if you look at the AA, the African Union, is that there's the political process has lost its moorings in the people's voices and aspirations, whereas one can argue that in the 60s and the 70s, the politics was moored in the struggles, of the people. Hence, the poets and the writers were writing. I think what is happening today, neither the African Union nor many of the political systems across the country are actually listening to literature, looking at visioning, looking at the artwork in the paintings and the sculpture, watching the films that Africans are producing across the continent, taking joy in the fashion that is sweeping the world, with designs that are coming out of the continent. The political processes are not supporting this process across the continent. Sadly, it seems to have happened also in our own country. So it speaks to that. How do we activate a relationship between a vision of what the South Africa of today should be on the one hand, and on the other, how that vision is actually being articulated and expressed in the artistic, in the art world. The reason that there was once at the start, just post 1994, a very vibrant relationship. That relationship seems to have dissipated. But what we have an advantage today is the technology. I live in Cape Town, but DSTV and some of the internet radio, every day I listen to transmissions in all the languages I know, Sesotho, Swati, Zulu, Xhosa, and so on, because I can just switch on the internet radio, and I'm there with all the languages that I need, that I know, and I've interacted with. We need to use technology more. I agree with the observation that about television, but stories can be read and told in African languages if audiences are made aware that there's going to be such and such and such. Turn on to a radio station so and so on your internet, wherever you are in the country, you will listen. I think we have a great deal of opportunity, but we need to get the coherence back. That's the only way I could sort of think on my feet in response to the question that you asked me.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you. It is very impromptu. Next time you can use a pseudonym if you, no, I'm joking. Thank you. At the risk of going over time, I just want to say thank you to everyone who listened, and thank you in particular to all our panelists and everyone who joined us this afternoon. I'm going to hand over to another elder, Poet Laureate Mongane Wally Serote, and he's going to share some reflections, some closing reflections. And thank you again, everyone.
Chairperson, can you hear me?
Perfectly. Perfectly.
First, thank you very much, Chairperson. And also I must thank all the presenters who took us back, but also were taking us forwards in terms of tasks which are facing us from the work that they were putting on our agendas, which comes, of course, from the past, but which speak a lot about where we are now and where we should be going. And also I'd like to thank Bridget, who has held my hand. This is the first time I come and attend this very, very, very important event. But she had never failed to invite me to the others. But because of technology and all of these many other things, it was a nightmare for me to know how to do it and to enter and to do it. But I'm very thankful that I was guided today and I entered and I've done this. As I listened to the presentations and the emphasis on the issue of looking at African languages in South Africa, I could not help it but come to the understanding that, you know, it is correct to say, if it is not written, we must take it that it did not happen. The presentations that were given by the different, done by the different writers who are no longer here, who have passed, their work is now present here. And most appropriate to some of the issues which Professor Njabulo was raising. Giving us a history of times past, but times also very appropriate, very relevant to our times now. And also projecting into the future, if we read, understand, and imbibe what the poets were saying, Mazisi, Mqhayi, Plaatje, Kgositsile, and so on, what they were saying. In other words, if we take them in terms of generations, we are put in a situation where we are alive, we are doing things, we have done things, but the question still remains. Are we going to do things so that all the challenges which are facing now are of the past? I think if I listen very carefully to what the poets have said, that is one thing that happens. But there is another thing which is being said here. What is it that we should do so that the languages themselves and what the languages have assisted us to project, to talk to create about? What is it that we should do that all of that, as much as possible, is institutionalized and accessible? I've said in the first instance, if it is not written, if it was not written, it means nothing existed, but it is written. And now I'm moving another step and saying, if it is not institutionalized, it may not exist. I mean, at the present moment, do I have, if I take the 3 Sesotho languages, do I have access to all the literature written in Sesotho, I should have access to that. At least I speak Sesotho. But it is very rare to come by them. So the question is, if they were institutionalized, and what does that mean? Would they be accessible? They were once accessible because they belonged to institutions. Whether it were institutions of printers, publishers, schools, universities, they were accessible. We are in a democracy, but they are not accessible. If they are not institutionalized, those languages don't exist. In the democratic parliament, we signed off a legislation which institutionalized the Pan-South African Language Board, precisely because we understood that if these things are not institutionalized, they do not exist. But we created the institutions, yet they don't exist still. Where are we going wrong? Because, and I'm emphasizing these two steps precisely because of what has been said here. This literature carries in it history, carries in it culture, carries in it that past and that future that we must live. If it is not institutionalized, it may not exist. What should we do? Having said that, also I realize, is it correct that majority of South Africans, I'm going to use a word that I fear, but I have no alternative. If somebody has an alternative, please assist me. Is it correct that the majority of people in our country do not have access to the word, reading the word? I don't want to say that they are illiterate. I want to say access, because the same people that we call illiterate, they read the Bible. But do they have access besides the Bible? And in the past, they did have access to literature in their languages. Hence, when you spend time with especially people in the rural areas, you had access to proverbs and idioms in the various languages, which is the investment by the people in that genre of the language, the history, and even what do you call forewarnings about the future. What is it that we should do to reinstate very systematically the written word in the 9 African languages? What is it that we should do to institutionalize their being written and their being accessible and their being a reference point of the people? In other words, we are saying it is not possible for arts and culture to happen and not belong to the people. What platforms must we do, must we put in place to ensure that this wealth of generations past and the generations coming is accessible to the people? Not only accessible, but they have had the education to access them. They've had the education to access, interpret, analyze, and utilize that wealth of history, that wealth of culture, that wealth of heritage. We have, in the years that South Africa has been a non-racial, non-sexist democratic country, we have not been able to do this. And therefore, how is it possible to talk about democracy if we have not been able to do this? Lastly, as people who work in the imagination, in the creative world, in the world of reality. The question that we must ask now is, if all of these things I have said have to be a reality, would it be correct that those of us who are active in it must have also understood politically what they mean, what our responsibilities is for them, and how we have a responsibility for the future to make sure that what has not happened is corrected. So I become very thankful. I'm sorry that I missed past events of the trust. I shouldn't have, but I did. I'll try to make up for that. And I'm most thankful, as I said, Bridget has actually held my hand and made sure that at last today I appear. And thank you very much for that, Bridget. And also to congratulate you, Bridget, and your team for the Art and Ubuntu Trust that has been created. We would not be able to say the things that we have just said now, which are very fundamental to a democracy, to a freed country, but also which may have played a role in intervening, because our freedom is there, in intervening in the insurgency that was orchestrated quite recently in KwaZulu-Natal and here, but also in this challenge that we're facing of the COVID-19. I'm saying this platform, I'm sure in partnership with others, and as the diversity is created and increases, we must value with our lives and ensure that it is there. Now, I was not aware that Professor Njabulo is there, and I'm pleased that he's there. Because now, in my heart of heart, I'm saying, hey, you can't miss these things. You must come to them. But here's another thing. Reference has been made to Vusi Mchunu. Where is he? Sometimes when people talk, I think he's in the meeting, and then I think, no, he's not there. And where is Vusi at the present moment? Because, and I'll tell you why I'm raising this thing. I worked very closely with Vusi in the past. And I know that he is a very committed person in all of the issues that we're talking about here. So at one point, I thought he's in the meeting. And then suddenly, I don't know, Chairperson, can you just assist me in my thinking?
Yes, he's here. Strun and Vusi, you can unmute yourselves. Yes.
Oh,
you're still muted.
Sorry?
So what do you call it? Can you show the camera to, what do you call it, the Strun, so at least can you see him?
No.
Can you see? Strun, do you just want to say something so that we...
Oh, okay. No, we're here. Vusi is finding it very amusing.
Hey, Vusi.
Very grateful for your comments.
Vusi, okay, I'll contact you because I'm very happy to see you. I'm very, very happy to see you. I'll contact you via Bridget and talk to you. Eh? But did Vusi present today?
Yes, I read it out on Vusi's behalf. The influences and significance. I read out the essay on Vusi's behalf. It's the influences and significance of orality on Mazisi Kunene.
Oh.
Okay. Vusi is recovering from a recent op, so Strone read out his contribution on his behalf, and they're sitting together.
Oh, I see. Chairperson, thank you very much. And thank you for giving me the time. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you again to everyone for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to everyone who listened. And special thanks to all the panelists for their insightful contributions. And more especially, please do get the book. It's really great. And I'm going to hand over to Zipo, who'll close us out.
Thanks, Bong. Yeah, we've come to the end of today's session. I would like to thank our guests, Dr. Mongane, Wally, Serote, Vusi Mchunu, as well as Struan Douglas, Zukiswa, Pakama, Professor Machila. And although she's not here today, I would like to thank Uhuru Palafala for her contribution to listening to literature towards South African canon. And a big thank you to you, Bongani. Thank you for being such a gracious and active chair. Thank you for being with us and for your contribution, Professor Njabulon Ndebele. I know you got caught off guard. And we also have our chairperson of Art and Ubuntu Trust. Thank you for your support and always for being here, Zubaida Jaffa. Yes, give thanks. And the books will be available on the African Sun Media website. It will be available as an ebook. But if you purchase 20 copies and above, they will be able to get printed. We will provide all the information via email. So you can, if you're not subscribed to Art and Ubuntu Trust mailer, make sure you do so. And also we appreciate your feedback. So if you could please send us an email on feedback@ubuntu.org. If you have any questions or comments, or you would like to share anything further. Also note that all these sessions, including this one today, are available on our YouTube page, Art and Ubuntu Trust. Next week, we have an exhibition of Datelifi's Proverbs. Unlike all the other sessions, which start at 2 p.m., next week's session will start at 3 p.m. and run for about an hour and a half. So please do join us for the exhibition next week. The exhibition also comes with a catalog, which will also be launching next week. So give thanks to everyone for being here. Hope to see you next week and also in the future. Oh, usually there's this little tradition that is done here. I hope everyone is still here. We would like to take a picture or a screen grab of everyone. So could you kindly just switch on your cameras for a few seconds and we can have nice a group photo? Yay.
Wally, can you smile at least?
No, man. Hello, Zubaida.
I'm so serious.
Good to see you.
And Vusi, I'm sorry, we're waiting for you to get your voice back, eh?
Thank you. We can just imagine all the other faces that are not in the picture. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Zubaida, hello.
Hi, hello and goodbye.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Fantastic, all of you. Well done, eh?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your
Bye-bye.
Saturday afternoon. Cool.